world, fraternities and sororities, as well as associations here today to listen into the conversation. All right, so people are still filing in, but I'm going to get us set up for the conversation here. If you've been on one of our webinars before, and I see actually a bunch of people that have been, you know that these are all about you. This content is dictated, the conversation is dictated by you and your feedback. I don't like personally attending webinars where I'm just listening the whole time. So if you can for me in that little chat box that you see, or in the Q&A box, whichever you prefer, just go ahead in there and type Y for yes, N for no, if you can see my screen and if you can hear me clearly. We'll have people monitoring that. If you have questions throughout, we really would love your questions and engagement. The more that you ask us, the better we can help you. And that's what it's all about. So why are you here today? We're going to be talking to someone that I have increasingly, more and more as every conversation, admired, Chip Deal from FEI, and going to be talking to him about his experience both at his current association as well as at the CFA Institute. We're going to get to that in just a second, but the whole goal today is really to tease out best practices, tease out tools and strategies that Chip and the community has used to successfully roll out projects and improve their impact to their members via their components, whether that's chapters or state associations, whether that's your universities, whatever it may be. And we're going to be touching on relationships, so trust is going to be a big topic today, and then communication. So different things that Chip has done in the past that have worked, and hopefully you can learn from today. And that's what it's all about. So that's why we are making this investment into education. So again, I just want to solicit as much feedback as we can from you all. From today's webinar, things that can be helpful. I got a few messages from our last webinar last week just saying that they've implemented some of the tools that we've talked about, and I thought that was kind of a confirmation that this is really needed. So please feel free to give us your honest and candid feedback as we go through this. All right, so as we get started, I would love to ask a first question before we bring Chip in. And as we're talking about the communication between your components, and you'll hear us reference those as chapters, but we understand that you might call them districts or sections or something different, and national or international, the headquarters staff. But if everybody could throw into the chat for me real quick, what are you looking to get out of this today? So when it pertains to that, what are some of the problems and pain points that you have at your current organization that we might be able to talk to today? Or maybe you're looking to review a tool like community software, or maybe you're looking to start a working group and need tips and tricks on that. Let us know what you're looking for, and we'll be able to help better answer some of those questions. All right, without any further ado, because nobody wants to hear me talk today. They want to hear you, Chip. I'd like to introduce Chip Deal. He's a CAE at the and runs the components and chapters at FEI currently. Chip, how's it going today?
Going great, Kyle, and hopefully it is with you as well and everybody else on the call.
I know we were emailing last night, and our presentation today, you reviewing it was competing with you watching the Cubs game. I hope maybe last night we were a good distraction with how they played.
Well, you were a good distraction, but you didn't affect the outcome like I wanted it to happen. So to any Chicago Cub fans on the call, hopefully better tonight, and to all Cleveland fans, congratulations both on Game 1 last night as well as your Cavaliers rolling out the championship banner.
Yeah, I was on the way in. Actually, I'm coming from Chicago today. We just flew in, and I was listening to the radio on the way in the cab, and I guess LeBron James was in the locker room last night at the post game and was getting distracted with questions from reporters because the Indians game was on. So I thought that was kind of cool to see him a fan of both. But Chip, I'll kind of set the stage here for us. We reached out to you a while ago after I had heard you speak and learn just your story around the component structure that you experienced and did so many amazing things at the CFA Institute. And now we're at the FEI, and I had reached out saying, hey, I would love to bring you on our webinars just to tease out the things you have done, the experiences you have gone through, We sat down in Newark when I was in town and had a great conversation at a local Starbucks. And I'm really excited to present all of these things today. How about give us a little more feedback just on your journey as it pertains to the association world and how you got where you're at.
Okay, sure will. And as folks see on the slide, I've been doing this for almost 40 years. And in fact, my entire career has been in association management. Indeed, I'm a second-generation association exec. My late father was for 30 plus years with the association representing furniture retailers. And like most people, it was not by design that I got into association work, even though I had some sense of it. It's when I got out of school in D.C. at George Washington, thought I might get into PR work. Nothing came along, and my dad said, well, you know the U.S. Chamber and ASAE, and he was a longtime ASAE member. He said both of those have resume referral services, so I put mine in. And lo and behold, got a couple of job offers, and I'm now with my 8th organization during the course of the year. The initial 5 were all with trade associations, company members, and now currently in my 2 previous jobs have been with professional membership organizations, individual members. So groups of completely different industries and professions. Different sizes. My very first one, we had a staff of 3 and a budget of about $250,000. Granted, that was back in the late 70s and early 80s. And then as we'll talk more about in a couple of minutes, when I was at CFA Institute, Chartered Financial Analyst, for 13 years, that's one of the largest global organizations in the world. And then just prior to coming here to 9 months ago, at the start of February, is when I joined the staff of FEI, Financial Executives International. I was with a small group of visual journalists, and there again we had a full-time staff of 3 and a budget of about $1 million. So I've really seen it from all different perspectives, sizes, types of groups, and really have had my hands in all the different cookie jars at different times during my career, including a lot of work in the chapter relations area. That's probably pretty much been a consistent throughout my entire career. So that's why I'm so passionate about it.
And Chip, that passion, it shines through in all the conversations we've had so far. I did have a couple of questions that people asked me. I think most people know what CAE is. Can you explain, you have the designation, the FASAE as well.
Right. That means I am a fellow of ASAE, which I was honored and privileged to be selected as a fellow last year. There are only 250 fellows at ASAE, a program that was started in the late 1980s. It's a very competitive selection process. It took me several times to be selected, as a matter of fact. So I think they say about 1% of their membership gets selected as a fellow based on career-long accomplishments and commitment to the organization and the profession. So it was something I was very honored to be selected for last year.
Great.
And I've been a CAE, gosh, I guess I've been recertified now 6 or 7 or 8 times. I first got my designation, CAE designation in 1982. I set a goal when I got into association work to get it as soon as I could, and I did 5 years after I started in the field of association work, and I was 27, 28 years old when I got that designation, so I've had it a long time, and I don't want to take the exam again.
So you mentioned earlier, and one of the things I was excited about today is the fact that, a lot of times when we're talking to organizations, there's always a uniqueness to each organization, each association or each fraternity or each sorority, but there's a lot of similarities. One of the experiences you bring to the table that's unique, in my opinion, is that you have been at one of the largest organizations in this space, the CFA Institute, as well as FEI. So The parent organization for CFA has over 500 employees, a budget of 200 million. So as we're talking today, you're going to be referencing a lot about having a budget, and now you're at FEI where it's obviously a lot smaller. Can you talk to us just a little bit about the differences in obviously what you're experiencing in FEI compared to CFA, just on the high level?
Sure. Yeah, and one thing I would put the caveat up front, particularly with regards to CFA Institute and its size, that I doubt there's anyone on the call that's with an organization that approaches CFA Institute in size. Perhaps there is, PMI, Project Management Institute's very large, IEEE, and there are some other very large global organizations, but they're far and few between. So don't be scared off by anything I say from a resources standpoint. Look at it from a scalability standpoint. What can you do? Excuse me, perhaps emulate it. We did during my 13 years there, only on a smaller scale. And again, like the slide shows, that worldwide CFA Institute had over 500, still does have over 500 employees. In Charlottesville, Virginia, to about 2 hours southwest of DC, is their primary headquarters, an office in New York, an office in London, one in Hong Kong, and since I left there about 4 years ago, at the end of 2012, they've since opened offices in China and India as well. So very large budget of well in excess of $200 million, and like you say, the largest society. And just so everybody knows what we're talking about in that respect, when I refer to societies at CFA Institute, they're large, essentially chapters or components. Officially, they're called member societies, and the largest one, New York, had over 10,000 members. So if you think of major financial markets like New York, Boston, London, Toronto, Hong Kong, places like that, the affiliated member societies had very large memberships, good-sized budgets and good-sized staffs, but there are also other ones much smaller. And so we dealt with the realm. We had, at the time, about 135 societies in over 60 countries. And at its peak, the budget that I was dealing with just in society relations was in the range of $10 to $12 million. That was just for society relations, so much larger than most associations' total budget. And globally, we had a society relations staff of about 20, which included the team I headed up in the United States, and then I had colleagues in London and Hong Kong that had society relations staff as well. And there we were exceptionally generous. We were in the fortunate position to be exceptionally generous in terms of funding support for the societies, both basic financial support as well as some grant-based growth funding, for innovative or creative projects, as well as underwriting of a lot of travel and lodging to our leadership meetings. And one other thing I'd mention on the society relations staff, we had what were called SRRs, Society Relations Representatives, and each SRR had a designated group of societies for whom they essentially provided concierge-level services. They were the one-stop shop for the societies to reach out to for all things they needed help on, and it was the SRR's job to provide that support or find the answers for them. So very fortunate in that respect. Contrast that with where I am now at Financial Executives International, which is the individual membership group representing senior level financial executives, CFOs, treasurers, controllers, people like that. Here we have our entire staff is right around 30, a budget of just over $6 million. Our largest chapter in Dallas has over 600, but we have many chapters, and we have about 64 active chapters totally in the U.S. Many of them have under 100 members, and only a small number are in excess of 300 members, so it's much different in that respect. And there are several of those that I would consider to be at risk in terms of their continued viability. Many of them have been around for decades and decades, up to 80 years, and certainly market conditions have changed over that time. Among that 30 staff, there are 4 of us, myself included, who are dedicated to membership and chapter relations, and under our umbrella we also have career management resources, which honestly we don't spend a lot of time on, and I now also have responsibility for our diversity and inclusion initiatives, which again I really have not had time to spend any time on. But the four of us, the three ladies and I that are in this area, spend all of our time trying to build FEI's membership, which is right around 10,000 total, as well as providing day-to-day support for our chapters.
Great, and so you just hit on a really good point, but I want to ask a question here to the audience. So I think that you're going to be able to tackle both sides of the spectrum here. If we got large organizations, medium or small, if everyone in the audience can just type into the Q&A or the chat, how many people on your staff do you have dedicated to chapter relations? And it might be a half a person at headquarters, or 4 people like Chip has. Let us know how many people you have dedicated on staff to chapter relations. I'd be interested to know.
Right, and Kyle, while typing that in, a couple of quick things I would add in addition here at FEI is, in order to be a member of a chapter, you have to first join FEI National. You can't join the chapter, not us. And while chapter membership is strongly encouraged, it is not mandatory, even though the vast majority of our members do to opt in to paying dues to a chapter, even if there's one in a reasonable radius of where they're located. And what we do on behalf of our chapters at no fee, we do it as a complimentary service. We do handle the dues billing, collection, and remittance for our chapters. And chapters do set their own dues, so it's going to vary. And our dues for our executive members currently are $525, and chapter dues range from 0. We have 11 chapters that don't charge any dues, and I could talk more about that if need be.
Yes.
But it ranges from 0 up to $375 for our chapter Atlanta that has the highest dues rate. So yeah. And right now on the dues invoice, it's listed as 2 separate items. So you'll see FEI 525, chapter dues of X, whatever X might be. And we have a task force, and I know we're going to talk more later about work groups and task forces, but we have a work group that's looking at our dues model now, and one idea is, do we have an integrated price point on the dues invoice going forward? But that's a whole separate discussion.
Great. All right. So, and just so you know, Chip, I'll read off some of the answers here. Patrick has 2. Scott has 4. Lisa, she says, not to repeat myself on these calls, but only me. Lisa, it's so great to see you back in here. Love your energy every webinar we do. Debbie, 2.5. Daryl, it's just me. So we got some really great answers. A bunch more coming in too, but it looks like right around there. We do have Diane with 33, so it does look like we got a large one in here as well. So Chip,
yeah, Diane's a big group, obviously.
Yeah. So Chip, here's where I want to start, and it's about the challenge around trust and relationships. And as we go through this, please tease out different strategies that you have implemented, or tools, or software, anything like that has worked, but also what hasn't worked. Because I think sometimes we talk about just what's been a success, but let's talk about what has failed, because I think there's often a lot more learned from our failures. So you mentioned earlier, and this goes back to the trust and relationships, that you were looking to decommission some chapters. Talk to us about that, and what your thinking is when you're thinking about the 80-20 rule. I think you referenced to me before, with 80% of the work coming from 20% of those troubled chapters. Walk us through your thinking and what you've learned from decommissioning chapters in the past.
Yeah, and we have not done it well. I take that back. We did actually, our board did just officially close down 6 chapters that had basically gone dark quite a while ago, and it actually formally asked to be closed for various reasons. A good or really a bad, it depends on your perspective, example being our Charlotte chapter. And you would think, gosh, Charlotte's a major financial center. Why would a chapter not succeed there? And that was a chapter that had almost 150 members. But the problem that particular group ran into was it became increasingly difficult to attract new volunteers to lead the effort, and the existing volunteers just got burned out, and attendance was declining. There was, people are very busy, and there are some other competing groups, and so the combination of burnout volunteers, no new volunteers, and declining attendance, they basically said, they threw up their hands and said, that's it, we're done. So they closed down. I'm hoping to resurrect a new chapter, if not specifically in Charlotte, then in the state. But that's a situation we have to look at here. And I know our general attitude of our board of directors is that they are loath to close down a chapter. They want to make every effort possible to resurrect or to revitalize those that are struggling, and I don't disagree with that. Make every effort possible, but at the same time, be cognizant of the fact and accept the reality that in certain markets it may just not be viable to have a formal chapter with all the infrastructure that goes into it. When I was at CFA Institute, that process took place as well, where the smallest of the chapters, the Toledos, the Okanagan, Columbias, and some of the other smaller markets that just didn't have the base of support and the growth possibilities. Efforts where they had to shore up to a certain level within a specified period of time, or they were closed down. And again, it's something you don't ideally want to do, but sometimes it's something you have to do. So here at FEI, again, only having been here 9 months now, we're really taking a very close look at all of our chapters, and we have yet another work group dedicated to this, which again we'll talk more about later, but the chapter engagement model work group is bucketing or segmenting our different chapters into those that are healthy, those that are struggling, whatever the label might be, and then determining what it is that each of those various segments or buckets need to either continue being successful or to bring them up to the level where they're consistently vibrant as well. And jumping back to CFA Institute, when we were there, up to a certain point, we did not have minimum standards. And over time, they were developed into what came to be known as SMSS, Society Member Service Standards. We were big on acronyms there. And basically, all the societies were expected to achieve the minimum standards, and they were segmented by different sizes, and those that did not, those are the ones that we had to really deal with. So, on the one hand, don't be heavy-handed about it, but at the same time, be realistic about what the prospects are for a particular chapter or component to be successful going forward, because if it's not, it's a disservice. It reflects poorly on the overall organization. In our case, if a chapter is not doing well, it's going to reflect poorly on FEI national, and it's going to be a disservice to the members in that market if they're not getting the level of value that they really should reasonably expect to get.
So Chip, and we got some questions coming in. Courtney, I'm going to get to yours in just a second. You talked about success when you're looking at the chapters. At CFA Institute and even FEI, how does the organization determine what success looks like, and how do you hold your components to a level of that success?
Good, very good question. Yeah, and that is sort of it's a squishy one. How do you really define or measure success? And I guess as much as anything is, in a broad sense, is the chapter operating as it should when you look at all the different aspects of it: governance, financial management, delivery of value, being in alignment with a larger strategic direction for the organization, whether that be national or global. Those sort of aspects. And then again, at CFA Institute, we had the Society Member Service Standard, so we could certainly measure it in that respect. Are the societies achieving what is the minimum standards that are expected of them, if not ideally exceeding those standards? However, at FEI, we don't have minimum standards. We don't have an agreement with the chapters, indeed, and again, I know this is something we'll talk later on about. Prior to my arrival on staff under a previous CEO, there was essentially a palace revolt by the chapters towards that individual because of what was perceived as a one-sided, very heavy-handed agreement that was being forced on to the chapters. But beyond that, I can, anecdotally and just through regular interaction with the chapters, have a pretty good sense of how well they are doing. And we'll talk about surveys. That's certainly a good indicator of our members of a chapter perceiving that or indicating that they're getting quality and good value out of the local chapter, and that's certainly a measure of success. Ultimately, I guess it comes down to retention. If they are satisfied, if the chapter is doing a good job, then they're going to hold on to the members, and if not, they won't. So I think that's an important indicator of success also.
That's a really great point. We talk about engagement a lot, and retention, the engagement retention ratio. So how many are engaging and how many are you retaining? If you're not measuring that, you should be. And so you just led us right into our kind of our next topic around the contentious to the collaborative. So we meet so many of you CRPs that it's often a very big brother kind of relationship between the components of your chapters and the staff at National. So you reference it a little bit around, with FEI, you don't have that standard in there. What are some ways for people that are listening? So you've had the experience at CFA and the experience at FEI. I think you've seen some really good and you've seen some really bad. What are some of the underlying foundation you need to lay to work towards a collaborative feel, which I know you're trying to rebuild at FEI? How do you start? Like, where do you even get started when it comes to something like that?
Right, and let me just to lay the groundwork for this, let me tell a story about how the relationship at CFA Institute evolved over time from what, to the point on the slide, what had been a very contentious relationship for a number of years to one that was much more collaborative. Not that they're all sitting around singing Kumbaya right now, but it is much more of a collaboration and partnership. So going way back, literally going back decades and decades ago, there were a number of city-based societies, again in the major financial markets, that predated the formation of what today is CFA Institute. And CFA Institute, under a previous name, was formed in the late 1960s. Early 1960s, late 50s, early 60s, when the Chartered Financial Analyst program was created. So you had these city-based groups, and there was a federation of financial analysts societies that existed for a number of years, and then along came CFA Institute, and a merger then occurred, a merger of that federation with the CFA organization, a merger that, get this, took 10 years to fully consummate before it was completely finalized, and it was a very contentious merger, and many of the large city-based societies felt as part of that merger, a lot of their authority had been usurped. So that led to some strains, many of the strains in the relationship. So you had that taking place, and then on top of that, you had very sustained global expansion in the CFA program taking place during the 1990s, and the view on many of the senior staff members above me, the CEO and others at the time, was that those societies were viewed as a necessary pain in the you-know-what body part. And at the same time, many of the societies viewed CFA Institute as the evil empire in Charlottesville. So it was truly an us versus them mentality, and that attitude was shared by many on the CFA Institute Board of Governors at the time. So they didn't like us, we didn't like them, myself excluded from that attitude. And so that's what led to that very contentious relationship. What happened ultimately, though, as our global expansion continued, was an incremental realization and acceptance that if CFA Institute was going to be successful on a sustained basis, it could not do it alone. It had to partner and collaborate with its society. So over time, and again, this was not an easy process. It wasn't just an overnight thing and not as simple as snapping your fingers, but over time, that move away from contentiousness towards integration and collaboration occurred. And there were also some changes taking place both in the senior-most leadership. We had a change at the CEO as one person retired and a new one came on board, and the composition of the board of governors changed as well as more people came onto the board who had a society perspective. So that changed the thinking at the board level as well. So it really did move over time, and it ultimately led to a document that we're going to talk about in a minute as well. So, and at FEI, the same sort of situation where we had a CEO who, quite honestly, ticked off a lot of the chapters, and they called for that person's head a few years ago, and they essentially got it. And so the person who's now the CEO has been here a bit over a year, had the good fortune of previously having worked here in the position that I now hold. So he was a known quantity, very well regarded, and he brought to the CEO chair a year ago some built-in trust that did not exist. So that certainly helped in terms of our restoration of trust that's ongoing and taking place now, but we've really made a great deal of progress in the past year, and hopefully now that I'm on board, I won't screw it up going forward.
So you mentioned a couple of really great tools, and we're going to start diving into those, so I hope everyone is ready to take some notes on those. But Chip, real quick, Courtney asked too, when it comes to all of that, so I think you've framed it up really well, and there's a lot of factors that go into this, but Courtney asks, how do you know when it's time to close the chapter? Does corporate make the decision, or does the chapter itself? So what's your experience with that?
I think that has to be a partnership on it. I truly, let me, I'm talking aloud, thinking aloud here, but I really think it has to be both parties involved in it. I don't like the situation where National comes in and says, we're shutting you down. Because a chapter may simply need help that's not being provided that can help turn things around. But if you have that honest, ongoing, open dialogue with one another, and both parties ultimately agree that it's in the best interest of everybody just to discontinue the operation of a particular chapter, that's the way to do it. And there might even be alternative models, and that's something we're going to hopefully take a look at here at FEI in terms of some markets where a formally structured chapter may not continue to be viable, but are there alternatives to it, such as local networking communities where you don't have that infrastructure and the board and everything else? So are there alternatives that can meet the needs of the members in a particular market? But again, my feeling is sometime a chapter is going to come to us and say, like Charlotte did, and say, it's not working here, we want to close down, and we will respect that decision. And at other times, we need to go in and have that open conversation with them and say, we have real concerns about your continued viability. Let's talk through it and see what the situation is and see if we can reach agreement one way or another.
Chip, when I asked you to do this webinar, I said, hey, let's bring some really good takeaways for the audience and things that you have used in guiding principles. Two of them were the principles of affiliation and the volunteer guiding principles. Up first is the principles of affiliation. So first, can you just kind of explain what that is and what you had at CFA Institute and what you have currently at FEI?
Sure, yeah, and the principle, and I think we're going to share after the call, if I'm not mistaken, Kyle, a copy of Principles of Affiliation and the Volunteer Involvement Guiding Principles for anyone who wants it. But
yes.
The Principles of Affiliation goes back over 12 years now. It ultimately was adopted in early 2004, and it really harkens back to what I was saying a minute ago about the transformation or evolution of the relationship from contentious to collaboration. And this document, Principles of Affiliation, was a tangible representation of how that relationship evolved. There was a task force of 7 people plus 2 of us, myself included, on the staff. So we had 3 members from our Board of Governors and 4 society representatives, a position called PCR, and I know we're going to talk about PCRs later on. So 7 that came together to really codify the relationship. And this was extremely, I think, an extremely important early step in solidifying that more collaborative relationship, and the codification of the relationship and the respective roles and responsibilities that the different parties, we at CFA Institute on a global basis and the societies around the globe, what the relationship was and what roles and responsibilities we had, rather than relying solely on verbal understandings, or more likely verbal misunderstandings of what the roles, the relationships, and the responsibilities were. And by having it in writing, it took away the interpretations that had taken place over a number of years, and really helped ensure that the information would be passed along from one set of leaders to the next. So it became a historical document in that respect. So the principles of affiliation really was a 2-part document. It was the principles, which are the high-level principles, something that should stand the test of time, that really captured the nature of the affiliation between CFA Institute and the societies, and hopefully ensured a harmonious relationship between the two. So again, the principles were designed to endure over time or stand the test of time, while the second part of the document, the operating framework, focused directly on specific activities and delineated who was responsible for what, where one had sole responsibility or primary, where the other did, and where it was shared. And so that it really promoted collaboration. And this aspect of it, the operating framework, was reviewed periodically. So just to, I'm not going to go through the whole document, obviously, because, and one thing I would say is it was not an easy process at all to come up with the final document. It took well over a year to finalize this document, a lot of back and forth, a lot of comments by everybody on the task force. When it was drafted, we vetted that draft with the full group of societies at a leadership meeting. Based on the feedback from them, we did further refinements to it, and then finally rolled it out to all the societies. So it was a very arduous process, literally at times arguments over dotting of I's and crossing of T's. But just to point out a couple of examples from it, from the principles, for example, that we would, both CFA Institute and societies would cultivate an environment of mutual trust and respect towards one another, and foster open communication and transparency. Might seem like a given, but that certainly had not been the case all along. And then there's some other examples. There were 6 aspects to the principles part, and then the operating framework, there ended up being 12 components to that. And just to call out a couple of examples that I think are typical of many associations. If you have a certification or a professional designation program, the CFA designation is the global gold standard in the investment management profession. And in this document, it made clear that CFA Institute, the global body, had the, quote, exclusive responsibility for developing and administering the program on a global basis, that societies were not involved in the development of the exam, in the development of the global body of knowledge, and the development of the curriculum. That was our sole and exclusive responsibility, but societies were able and allowed to assist us by providing input that ensured that all candidates in the program met the work experience requirements for awarding of the charter. So societies did have a role, but we were the ones that administered the exam. Another example, a lot of groups are involved in advocacy, whether you call it advocacy or lobbying or whatever, and in that respect, the document said that we would respect each other's rights to engage in advocacy activities on either a global, regional, or local basis. We would seek society participation in advocacy efforts. We would support societies that chose to engage in advocacy as long as those positions reinforced our global positions on certain advocacy principles, and that societies would not develop any standards or advance advocacy positions that conflicted with ours. So it was clear where the lines were drawn there. Volunteers, approving volunteers for our CFA Institute committees and task forces. Our Board of Governors had responsibility for that, but that the board would welcome input of societies in the selection of individuals. And we'll talk more about that on the volunteer guiding principles. And the final example on professional development, since so many societies do that. Here it said that CFA Institute and societies would, quote, complement and support, not duplicate and compete, close quote, with each other's activities. And again, that seems like a given, but there had been some redundancies, some duplication of efforts, some stepping on toes in the past. So just made it clear where the lines were drawn. So again, it codified the relationship, codified the roles and responsibilities, so that by having it in writing going forward, it was clear to everybody who did what and when.
Well, there's two things that I really love for that. First off, I love the word codify. So it's a great vernacular, but also you hit on a lot of points that we have seen as trends, and one of them really is not competing with your chapters in defining that relationship. I can tell that you're flipping through some pages here, Chip, so if anyone wants to see those guiding principles and you want us to share those with you after the webinar, just type into the chat or Q&A, and my marketing team will make sure to get those out to you. So just let us know that you'd like to take a look at those as perhaps a template. And before we jump over to the volunteer guiding principles, what are some, so in getting this done, Chip, you mentioned it takes a lot of work. And I think that as a CRP, nothing's ever easy. You just don't want to make it complex. So that easy versus hard, simple versus complex. Nothing's ever easy, but you want to stay away from the complex. So if somebody, we've seen a lot of organizations that had a very antiquated affiliation agreement, ones that do not, and want to make a change on those two scenarios. What's some advice you would give them as a CRP in getting that done? Obviously, you have to corral certain parties at your headquarters and board level, but then also obviously corralling and getting the buy-in from the chapters. What would you, what kind of advice would you give to those people?
Yeah, and a couple of words you said right at the very end there, buy-in. I think the buy-in is very critical. It cannot be a top-down, heavy-handed approach to things. And again, that ultimately proved to be the undoing of our previous CEO here. I think organizations make a mistake if they try and take that one-sided, we've got the gold, therefore we rule approach to things versus really engaging their components or chapters in the process and coming up with an even-handed, balanced approach that really takes both perspectives into mind and really recognizes the fact that almost without fail, chapters have fewer resources at their disposal, resources of money, of time, of talent, and you have to really be cognizant of that and sensitive to that. And also really understand why it is you need an agreement. Again, right now at FEI, we don't have an agreement with our chapters. We trust them to operate properly and not run at counter purposes to what we do. And at CFA Institute, we, in addition to the principles of affiliation, which was really not an agreement, it was just a statement of roles, responsibilities, and relationship. But ultimately, we did create an agreement there that was really tied to the society member service standards, but it was a very collaborative partnership approach to developing it with a lot of input, a lot of engagement, and a lot of buy-in from chapters. So give thought to why you're asking for certain things. And I see a lot of organizations that ask or require a lot of their chapters, and I'm very often left to wonder why. Why do you need that? Why do you want that? What are you going to do with that information? And if it's just, oh, isn't that neat to know, that's not good enough for me. To me, it really has to be actionable information that you really need. In our case right now, we don't feel that we need an agreement with our chapters around the country in order to have a good relationship.
All right, so everyone, we just had a bunch of people that do want to see that as example. You're probably going to be hearing from Max McCain on our team, and he'll be getting you that information. I know we only got 14 minutes left, so and we still got some really good things to go over. So let's jump over to the volunteer guiding principles. Let us know if you have any further questions on the principles of affiliation, if you're going through that change. But this is another one, volunteer guiding principles. I was at a chapter leaders meeting last week, and I was able to, I felt lucky, was able to sit there with 30 chapters in that organization or so, and just heard a lot of feedback from the different things that they wanted to see National provide as a template to their chapters, especially when there's change management. So a new president, a new treasurer, so on and so forth. Chip, talk to us about what you've learned over the years with the volunteer guiding principles and how you've used those to make stronger chapters.
Sure. And this particular document, the Volunteer Involvement Guiding Principles, the full name of it, followed the creation of the principles of affiliation. And as much as anything, quite honestly, it was a step undertaken to bring greater consistency and uniformity internally at CFA Institute to what had been a rather ad hoc division by division process, where what the marketing and communications division did, for example, to select and recognize volunteers maybe varied wildly and widely from what was done in the CFA program division. So there was no uniformity, no consistency, and particularly in terms of the selection process. A lot of it, quite honestly, was the buddy system. Oh, I know that Kyle guy, you know, I like him, he's done some great stuff, or I'm going to pick him to be on this committee, versus having a more real criteria for doing so. So uniformity and consistency was an important aspect of it. A couple of things in the document, and I'll move to it fairly quickly since I know we are tight on time, is it did reference, and those of you who get a copy of it will see it does reference aspects of the principles of affiliation, particularly operating framework number 1 and number 7, in terms of how important volunteers are in terms of advancing the efforts of CFA Institute and societies, and also the fact that the Board of Governors had the responsibility for approving volunteers but welcoming the input of societies in that selection process. And it was noted in the volunteer principles document that while the document was really designed to apply just to CFA Institute, not to societies, this principle certainly could serve as a model for adaptation at the society level. I think many of them did so. So I think it's something you could do as well. You could use it from if you're with a national or global organization, you could adapt it at your part, but also provide it to your components for consideration. And then the document goes through different aspects, you know, the relationship, the value of volunteers, the accountability, looking for diversity of representation, how to promote volunteer aspects and being cognizant of the fact that volunteerism differs from country to country, so on and so forth, and the oversight of them. But a couple of things I want to point out, again, from a recruitment standpoint, recruitment of volunteers, the recruiting effort included asking societies to nominate individuals to serve on committees and task forces and to provide unbiased evaluations of the nominees that they were aware of. And that, again, Board of Governors would actively seek input from society. So that was important, and again, it reinforced and underscored what had been stated in the principles of affiliation. So those are the key things. It just sort of laid out, you know, how will we recruit volunteers? How will we orient and develop them? How will they be supervised? Which sort of is a strong term, but how will managed, held accountable, and how will they be recognized? And it helped, again, bring consistency and uniformity to the process, which had been significantly lacking in the past.
Great. And so because we're short on time and there's one topic that I really wanted to get to today, I'm going to skip ahead a few slides. But while I do that, Chip, I have Scott here who asked a question about the affiliation agreement. Do you worry about any liability exposure without having an actual affiliation agreement?
Quite honestly, Scott, no, I don't. Having an agreement doesn't lessen the exposure. It may provide some protection, but from a real risk standpoint, we have insurance coverage. We have D&O and general liability coverage, and all of our chapters here at FEI are included in our policy. We provide that to them free, and the chapters are included as an entity, and it includes all of their officers, directors, committee chairs, and now paid staff administrators. So, we certainly have protection in that respect without having an agreement. But beyond the formal legal risk aspect, I think just having that relationship with the chapters meets the needs, and where you can have those honest discussions, really have a clear understanding of the challenges they might be facing and how the national organization can be of help to them in that respect without, and that's going to be true, again, whether you have an agreement or not.
And Chip, to piggyback off that.
Yeah, and Scott, feel free to contact me. I know my contact information will be on the very final slide, but feel free to contact me offline if you want to delve into that deeper.
Yeah, we'll share Chip's information so you guys can reach out directly to talk to him. A follow-up question from Lisa on that too, and I see a lot of associations that struggle with this, and even in the fraternal space, around the tax filing. So you can either file as with the group exemption where the taxes are filed at national or headquarters, or we see a lot of associations and or the fraternal world where the individual chapters will file their own taxes and have their own EIN. Lisa asked, so do the chapters fall under the association's group tax umbrella? And to add to that from my side, what would you recommend and what have you seen success with?
To that latter question, Kyle, I don't know that there's any consistent answer. At CFA Institute, we strongly encourage, we didn't require, but we strongly encouraged member societies, at least in the United States, to be incorporated. And again, realizing we had societies in 60-some countries, incorporation was a concept that didn't apply in many of those countries. So we strongly encourage it. Here at FEI, we have not really taken a position. We don't say you should or should not be incorporated. The members that we're dealing with, being financial executives and very involved in risk management themselves, we trust them to take the appropriate step. They do file, each of the chapters do file their own Form 990, and 990 season is upon us. I've been reminding them of that fact this week, in fact, on some conference calls. So they do file their own 990.
Maybe we should have started with this one too. We have recommended this in a past webinar around surveys, but I thought this was interesting, Chip, is a number you shared with us. 86% of respondents said that chapter local peer networking is their primary reason for belonging to FEI. Now, I know that this can vary from organization to organization depending on what their impact and what their mission is, but some level of engagement we find is number one or number two consistently across the board for the associations and fraternities and sororities that we engage with. So I think it's fair to say that chapters are essential to what's going on. Walk us through just some of the ways, because I know there's oftentimes organizations asking, is this even worth it? But you've kind of flipped it on its head and you've taken the opposite approach where you can deliver your missional impact so much greater when you just work with components in the right way. So you got some things listed here. And I know you recently formed a working group, if I'm not wrong. Kind of talk to us about that and how you're going about re-engineering the way FEI operates with components to recognize this value that the members are seeing.
Sure. Yeah, and real quick comment, I mentioned earlier, we have in round numbers 10,000 members. We have had steadily, not dramatically, but steadily declining membership in recent years. Net attrition on an annual basis of 2 to 4% over the last 5 years or so. So, we have the challenge right now, and I'll call it the opportunity, being the eternal optimist, the opportunity to really turn that situation around. We do a good job of bringing members in the front door, but the back door is wide open. So our attrition has been greater than our acquisitions. But as you indicate with the slide, the 86% member surveys that we did late last year and a few months ago, the middle part of this year, clearly indicated that members are getting greater value out of their chapter membership than they are out of their national membership because, like you say here with the slide, they liked having that opportunity for local networking. They like the professional development opportunities they get at the local level, and they're just not seeing as much value at the national level, particularly since most of our members don't really care about our advocacy work, our largest members, and we represent everywhere from the Fortune 50 companies down to smaller middle market firms or financial executives at those firms. So the big ones, the Fortune 50s, 100s, 500s, are engaged in us because of our technical committees and our advocacy work, but the members by and large don't care about that. So they're really getting the value at the chapter level, and that's why it behooves us. It's incumbent upon us to help ensure that our chapters are strong, vibrant, and consistently delivering value at the local market and doing everything we can to work with them. Your slide mentions also the 3-question survey. Every year we do a question as part of an awards program we have to recognize most outstanding chapters. We ask chapter members 3 questions. A, how satisfied are you with your chapter membership on a 5-point scale? 2, how likely are you to renew your chapter membership? And 3, how likely are you to recommend chapter membership to a colleague? And some of the chapters we get, a very poor response from the membership, but it's a telling indicator, and it really shows the chapters that are strong, the members reflect that in their responses. So we do the chapter-specific surveys with those 3 simple questions: satisfaction, likely to renew, likely to recommend to others. And then we also do, at least on an annual basis, a more detailed member satisfaction where we're able to tease out chapter-specific responses in that as well and share that information with our chapters. So given what's going on, it's really important that we really support our chapters. So Kyle, I think going to the next slide, the working groups, touching upon those, we do have several now. I mentioned earlier a chapter engagement model work group where we're doing the segmentation of chapters based on their relative state of health right now and determining what resources we currently have that are valuable, how we can enhance those, and what additional resources we might need to provide to our chapters, A, to keep them strong, or B, to pull them up to that level of health. And also make those tough determinations of, are there any chapters that just aren't viable going forward. So we have that work group that's comprised both of members of our board of directors and chapter representatives. Another work group, which is actually a task force in this group, the dues task force, is we're taking a very in-depth look at our existing dues model. Again, in the member survey, a number of members have said, I'm not getting enough value at the national level, you need to lower your dues, which are $5.25 right now. There's obviously great risk in reducing dues if you don't have the sustained effect from a reduction that you would hope to have in terms of acquisitions and retention. And as I mentioned also, our chapters set their own dues rates right now. So, and very strong sentiment that they want to retain that flexibility to have their own dues rates rather than having a uniform national chapter rate or having one price point that includes both national dues and chapter dues. But one of the issues being discussed is, do we change the dues invoices where it doesn't say national dues of 525, chapter dues of X, total amount due is whatever it might be, just to have one single price point that would vary from market to market. In Atlanta, it would be $900. If you're in Knoxville, it would be $525. If you're in Silicon Valley, it would be $825, so on and so forth. So we have a task force of about 24 individuals, couple of members of our board of directors, but the rest of them are all chapter representatives from across the country in different size chapters that are spending a great deal of time on this issue, because it really is critical for FEI's future success that we get it right. And the members of the task force realize that, so they're not rushing through. It's better that we take too long than try and meet a arbitrary deadline to get things done beforehand. So taking a lot of look at that as well. So the engagement model for chapters and our dues model and structure going forward that includes chapter membership.
Chip, just like when we were sitting in that Starbucks by your office, an hour is definitely not enough when you and I get rolling on the CRPs. I'm going to share the slide with your contact information in just a moment, but just in conclusion, as all of us go forward, whether we're in the association world or other segments of the nonprofit like the fraternal world, what are just some guiding principles that you hold to day in and day out? You said one earlier, and I wrote it down: irrational persistence, that relentless pursuit to improve it. What would be the advice you'd give to all of us?
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't realize I said irrational persistence, but I like that, so I'll have to remember that one. Yeah, I think again, so much of it gets back to the trust factor. Can we trust? And do we trust one another? Do we trust the chapters to operate in a responsible manner that advances the industry or profession that our organization represents, whether it's financial executives or investment professionals and all the other groups that I've worked for over the past 40 years. So do we trust them when we're on the national staff, and do those chapters trust us on the staff to have their best interests in mind? Because absent that trust, everything will fall apart. So I think it's really critical that that trust it exists and constantly be nurtured. You can't just take it for granted. You always have to be nurturing it, much as you do in any relationship, whether it's spousal or anything else, or working with your members of your own staff, whatever it might be. You've got to constantly nurture the trust, nurture the relationship. And the other aspect is really treat it as a partnership. I know I used the word heavy-handed, top-down earlier. I don't think you can be effective and successful if you view chapters as groups that can be controlled or manipulated by you on the national staff. It really has to be a collaboration, a partnership between the two parties, because ultimately it's not about you, it's not about them, it's about the constituents, the members that you represent, and you have to operate with their best interest in mind. And how can you on the national staff and those at the chapter levels operate together in a manner that will best serve the needs of those that you represent?
Chip, as always, you are a beacon of wealth, and we appreciate it. We're going to be sending out some of the tools that Chip we were referencing throughout the webinar, so you'll see those in your inbox, along with the recording and the presentation slides. Chip's information is up on the screen right now. That is his email and his work phone number. Connect with him on LinkedIn as well. Chip, I want to thank you personally. You're so giving of your time and your experience. There's so many nuggets in there that I'm sure each of us could use working inside our associations and organizations. So we appreciate you doing this for no other reason than out of the kindness of your heart, and hopefully further the impact that the association world is making as a whole.
Well, I appreciate that, Kyle, and I know we've covered a lot of ground in a hurry, and we actually weren't able to get to some things that we planned to. So hopefully the pace was not so rapid that people got lost along the way. Hopefully taking away at least one good idea that they can adapt at their own organization. And again, don't hesitate to reach out to me by email, via LinkedIn, or by phone if you need clarity on anything, have questions, or just want to delve more deeply into any of the issues.
And we appreciate everyone that is in attendance or perhaps is listening to the recording right now in the future. But that is going to do it for us. Chip, thank you so much. Good luck to your Cubs tonight. Hopefully they can break the drought there.
Yeah, hopefully as well. Thank you.
All right. Signing off, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thanks.